Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press, and from listeners like you. This week, help support the work of Central Valley Daily and KVPR by becoming a monthly member. Join at $8 a month or more and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate or by clicking the donate button on the KVPR app.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. Happy Friday, it's December 13th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Every winter, thousands of people up and down the Western Hemisphere gather to observe and count massive amounts of birds.
So anybody can participate. It's entirely a volunteer effort. Last year, there were 76,000 individual observers.
Coming up, we'll learn about the annual Christmas bird count and where it takes place. But first, today's headlines. Governor Gavin Newsom has set a special election for Assembly District 32. That's a seat in the southern San Joaquin Valley left vacant by Congressman Vince Fong. KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports there's already a candidate in the race.
His name is Stan Ellis. He's a farmer and tech entrepreneur who announced his candidacy mere hours after the special election was called. He has Fong's endorsement, along with several others from the Valley's GOP. Ellis bills himself as a conservative Republican who will fight against the state's Democratic supermajority in Sacramento. He's the only candidate to throw his hat in the ring so far. Ken Weir, a Bakersfield councilman, had run for the seat in November. He lost to Fong by 20 points, though, and his representatives declined to state whether he would run again. The special election is scheduled for April 29th. It's the fifth time voters will head to the polls in this region. Kevin McCarthy's resignation from Congress last year set off a frenzy of special elections for his seat and now for Fong's former seat. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Bakersfield.
The former Clovis Unified Superintendent now says she wants to be Fresno County's Superintendent of Schools. Emer O'Brien is retired from Clovis Unified, but recently took interest in the job, GV Wire reports. The position is currently held by Michelle Cantwell-Kofer, who was elected 2 years ago. The race for county superintendent will be held during the 2026 midterm elections. California's Secretary of State says a special election may be the only way to resolve a Kern County election dispute. That's after more than 100 ineligible voters were allowed to vote in a school board race for Greenfield Union School District. The incumbent in that race lost by only 8 votes. The school district sued the county's election over the error. The Registrar of Voters says a mapping error is what led to the wrong voters weighing in, KGET reports. It's unclear when or if a special election will indeed take place. A Merced elementary schooler helped light the state's official Christmas tree this week in Sacramento. Carter Morris is a 5th grader at Joe Stefani Elementary School. He placed a wreath made of handprints on the tree that were traced by his classmates. Officials with the Merced City School District says Carter embodies respect, integrity, warmth, and compassion. They say he also represents thousands of students with or at risk for developmental disabilities. The season for kissing under the mistletoe has arrived, and while there's no guarantee for holiday smooches, you can get a permit to harvest your own mistletoe this season. Aaron Stone from our California newsroom partner, LAist, has more.
We associate mistletoe with romance, but it's actually a parasitic plant that can harm trees. Severe infestations can even kill them. That's why the Angeles Forest requires permits to harvest it. Mistletoe is often found on oaks and pines. If you do get a permit to harvest, be sure not to cut limbs off trees. Just pluck it by hand. Mistletoe can be sticky, so bring gloves. And keep mistletoe away from pets and children. It's poisonous if eaten.
That was Aaron Stone with LAist, and you can get a permit at your local National Forest District office.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, with special holiday financing deals on select models through the end of the year at the new showroom on Blackstone and Barstow. Information at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. Every year, the National Audubon Society gathers bird watchers to host an annual massive Christmas bird count. The count originally started as a way to promote conservation through counting rather than hunting birds. The count is kicking off tomorrow with hundreds of events planned across the U.S., Canada, and even South and Central America. And over a dozen bird counting events are also being organized here in the Central Valley. The events will be held through January 5th. Ian Souza-Cole is a program manager with Audubon California and joins me to share more about this unique mass event. Thanks for joining me, Ian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First, Ian, could you tell us more about the Christmas bird count, what spawned its creation, and why does it happen at this time of year? I know it's the 125th year.
I think it started by interested birders getting together during the holiday time and getting out and counting birds during a period when people don't typically study birds as much. A lot of research on birds is focused on their breeding season and migration, which is periods when we get a lot of diversity and abundance. But the winter is a little bit slower, but there's still a lot of interesting birds out there. And so the Christmas bird count has been a way to census birds during a period when they don't typically get counted.
After all these counting events have happened, what's done with all that data and bird information?
Yeah, so the value of the CBCs is that it's a long-term data set. So like you said, it's over 120 years now, and that's pretty rare to have. And so it's really valuable to researchers who are looking at discovering trends in bird distribution and abundance across really long periods. And so it's kind of it's a really broad data set that you can use in a lot of different ways. Audubon has been involved with publishing different studies on looking at how bird populations have been changing. So they've had a couple recent studies, one linking changes in distribution to changes in climate. So they've shown that across most species or most groups of birds that they've been demonstrating range shifts in response to climate change, as well as to land use change. And it was also, Christmas bird count data was also utilized in a landmark study in 2019 that was published in Science that the headline was 3 billion birds lost. And so that study brought in a lot of different data sources, including CBC data, showing that over about 50 years since the 1970s, North America has lost 3 billion birds.
Billion with a B?
Yeah.
Wow. So let's talk logistics. How does the bird count actually work? And can anyone participate? What kind of equipment would they need? And how do you spot birds?
Yeah, so anybody can participate. It's entirely a volunteer effort. Last year, there was 76,000 individual observers across the hemisphere. So it's definitely broad-based and everybody's welcome. And in terms of equipment, binoculars are desirable. You can count birds without binoculars for sure, but it's definitely easier to identify birds if you have a basic pair of binoculars. And then also some sort of bird guide might be helpful depending on your degree of experience. So Audubon has a bird guide app that you can download for free.
And beforehand, we learned that your personal favorite bird is the Lewis's woodpecker. And we actually have some sound of it in the wild. That is so cool. What about the Lewis's woodpecker do you love so much?
I like the Lewis's woodpecker because they are very distinctive looking compared to all of our other woodpeckers. They are totally distinct and they have this kind of pinkish, greenish wash. And then the other thing is they're not common. So they're kind of, whenever I see one, it's like, oh, great, there's Lewis's woodpeckers here, because you don't see them that often. But when you do see them, you will see them in large numbers a lot of the time. So especially in the foothills on either side of the valley, where there's a lot of oaks, a lot of acorns, that's when you'll see them this time of year. And so they'll be all over the woodland, just foraging, and they're pretty conspicuous. So you can see them pretty easily if they're around.
And you specifically work with Audubon's Working Lands Project. I know you all do a lot of work with farmers here in the Central Valley. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. our Working Lands program is invested in promoting bird habitat on the various different land uses in the Central Valley and trying to promote bird habitat, in areas that you might not otherwise expect it. And so trying to find ways to benefit birds through changing land practices slightly. And so one of our big projects is called Bird Returns, and that's focused on providing habitat for migratory shorebirds. And we work with a lot of rice farmers in the Sacramento Valley, and then down in the San Joaquin Valley, it's mostly with private wetland owners who are managing wetlands primarily for waterfowl hunting, but then during the spring and fall, we've worked with them to provide that shallow water habitat. And then the other big thing that I work on personally in the San Joaquin Valley is tricolor blackbird conservation. So that's a species that's almost endemic to California, and they nest on fields that are operated by dairies, and the timing of their nesting conflicts with when those fields would be harvested. So we, along with some partners, including NRCS and the dairy industry, we've worked closely with dairy operators to monitor those colonies and pay the dairy operator to delay harvest on those fields so that the birds can finish nesting.
Ian Souza-Cole, Program Manager with Audubon, California. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And if you would like to find a Christmas bird counting event near you, just go to audubon.org/Christmas-bird-count. And that does it for today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.